Was there anyone called William Shakespeare in real life? That is a question. Much like his character, I mean Hamlet's, to be or not to be, that is the question. So, was there someone called Shakespeare or there wasn't? It's very difficult to say. And the question, the original query was, of course, raised in my mind after having a talk with one of my mother's uncles long back, say around 14 years back. My mother's, paternal uncle, as we call in Indian English, you know, he was a well-read person, not from English literature. In fact, he was not even a graduate, but he studied in those colonial days in British system and school education he had, but then very well-read, very good in English, Bangla and all that. So he had said that, I think that it was Francis Bacon who wrote all the plays that go by the name of Shakespeare. I did not give it much of a credit because I thought it was a kind of whim or caprice of him particularly, or a group of person who are more interested in this kind of stories. And but then of late, I mean, the question somehow came back to me, and I just started doing some exploration, and then I was surprised to find that Shakespeare did not exist. This theory is not only an individual, perception of a few stray people disconnected with each other, but there is a strong body of researcher, rather guild we can say, who are collectively called anti-Stratfordians. Because Shakespeare was born at Stratford-on-Avon, so we call him the Bard of Avon. So those who don't believe in that fact, they are anti-Stratfordians. And their prominent opposition group is known as Oxfordians. It was more or less, Oxford scholars, a compendium or, continuum of Oxford scholars for a very long time who have been consolidating the idea of a real Shakespeare who existed, and he wrote the plays that we think he wrote. In a very interesting article called The Question of Authorship, David Catman has given the details of all these positions and theories, and then very surprisingly, it is very difficult to take a final call even at this point. I mean, if we trust that article. And it has been included again ironically in the Oxford Guide to Shakespeare, which was published in the year 2003. An Indian edition was published in 2007, thankfully, otherwise those are very costly, we could not have been able to get them and read. So I find that question of authorship as raised by David Catman to be very instructive. So, and then I was surprised to think after reading him that we actually do not have any direct evidence which can make us decide in favor of the existence of Shakespeare. In fact, he did not have we don't have handwritten manuscripts of his own plays. Also, there are signatures of Shakespeare, but anyone assuming the name of Shakespeare can write, can sign as Shakespeare. Now, who are the contenders? Not Bacon, as my mother's uncle said, but there are chiefly three. One is, very interestingly, Queen Elizabeth herself. This is a bit far-fetched. Then there is another one, Michelangelo, the Italian Michel, not the sculptor one. And then third and most powerful contender is Marlowe, because as we know, it's a common knowledge for students of English literature that Marlowe, had he not died at the age of 29, would have surpassed Shakespeare, in due course of time. And all the plays that he wrote before his death were far better than the plays that Shakespeare wrote during the same period. Both were born in the year 1564. Okay, that is again a very surprising thing. Please take it. And then there are a lot of similarities in themes, and I would say even in languages. See, for example, Marlowe's Jew of Malta, which is by common consent was published or staged in the years 1589 to 1590. 4 5 years later, we see that same Jew in a modified version, I would say, appearing as Sherlock in The Merchant of Venice. And then please be very careful, we actually do not know who is the intended Merchant of Venice. It could be Shylock, it could be Antonio and Bassanio, as is the assumed meaning, but it could be Shylock also, because he too is a merchant of Venice. The case is not the same with Othello, for example, where it is written as a subtitle, Othello the Moor of Venice, or there is only one Moor in that play, or the Prince of Denmark, Hamlet the Prince of Denmark. So only one prince, Prince of Denmark and Hamlet. But then the Merchant of Venice, no one is named, and there are 3-4 contenders. Anyway, that is not the whole thing. Compare the Renaissance fervor of Dr. Faustus and his damnation with that of Hamlet, for instance, or very explicit homoerotic, or rather we can say homosexual engagement of Edward II in Marlowe's Edward II, and Shakespeare's similar utterances in the sonnet for his boyfriend. And then again, Marlowe's Hero and Leander, there are also these homoerotic tendencies, and so many other things are there. And then the power and the questioning of power, so Tamburlaine, Macbeth, compare. Now, earlier it was thought that Shakespeare were influenced by those, and then even now majority think like that, and then he extended on that. There's no harm. But what I want to say is that there is still a strong and well organized body of people who think that it was Marlowe who wrote this, because Marlowe's death is a mystery. He was stabbed in an inn, but exactly why, nobody knows. Some think it is a case of homosexual jealousy, some think it was over a fight regarding the authority of church, etc. Some have indicated the highest hand, that is the Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth the First's involvement. And then it is also surprising that Marlowe died in their 16 I think, sorry, not 16 even, say 1564 to 29, say around say 1593, something like that. I've just forgotten the date exactly. But then the clarification, the royal clarification regarding Marlowe's death was given in the year 1925, in the 20th century, early 20th century. Of course, denying all the charges, but that is also surprising, somewhat like Netaji's death, we can say, or Lal Bahadur Shastri's death, which is still under scanner, and a major section of people believe that these were not deaths. So similarly, Marlowe's thing, but then there is another version which says that Marlowe, to save himself from the charges of felony, sedition, etc., he faked his death, and after that continued writing using the pen name of Shakespeare. Now, that is also perfectly possible. But then what is the counter argument? As I have learned from David Kathman, there is no strong counter argument to this story. Only counter argument is that how do we know that Ben Jonson was Ben Jonson, or Marlowe was Marlowe, or Webster was Webster? Because the lack of evidences that have been collected with regard to Shakespeare, the same applies in case of other playwrights also. So here we are in a very we can say catch-22 situation, and then Kathman's answer is somewhat like Harold Bloom's answer. Harold Bloom is the greatest champion of Shakespeare in recent times, and possibly the best that we have had in history ever since Dr. Johnson. So Harold Bloom always says that why Shakespeare? That kind of a question can only be answered by a counter question, who else is there? Similarly, David Kathman says that, if he is asked to prove that real Shakespeare existed, then there is a counter question that proved that Ben Jonson or Marlowe existed. But then we know that this is not a very, very convincing answer, probably, especially for those who doubt that Shakespeare ever existed. So they are anti Stratfordians, as I've said, and then people from Oxford over the years have been trying to maintain this. So those that theory that Shakespeare really existed, so they are known as Oxfordians. So this is the summum bonum of the thing, and I think that this will be profitable for all of you, especially those who are interested in Renaissance literature. From next time, if you study on your own, take two texts, one by Marlowe and one by Shakespeare, and read them side by side and look at the language, look at the imagery, all these things, and what is the thing that comes to your mind. I wish that those days YouTube existed. I mean, YouTube were there so that Shakespeare or Marlowe could have recorded their videos and left it for us. So the thing is rather interesting. Well, if you ask me, I would say that this is certainly possible, but I finally do not think that this is a credible theory. I think they were two separate persons. Their flair of writing, their similarity of styles, they are being born in the same year, or their fascination for homoerotic love notwithstanding, they were two different persons. But anyway, we cannot say anything conclusive about that. So for a better conclusion, I would just request you to go through Foucault's book. What is an author? It's not a book, rather it's an essay which is a continuation of, in a way, or implicit criticism of Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author. But if you read Foucault's essay, then you will also look at the question from another angle of the Shakespeare authorship, which of course will not nullify the doubt that Shakespeare did not exist, rather it may fortify it, but then it opens up another angle that why do we need authors at all? Why do we need authors at all? One thing is that of course they are to get their royalties, etc. under those days, but beyond that, what is the function of an author or author's name in literature, in culture, and in society? So with that note, I would like to end it. Thank you.